Schminky, I need you for this joke. Come here. America. Okay. America is a land filled with natural wonders. Like the 105-acre Pando aspen clone in Utah, the largest living organism on the planet, or the half-billion years of geology visible at the Grand Canyon, and of course, most famously, that giant pile of sand in Chelsea. Boston reference for all my Bostons out there. But America once had many more natural wonders that have long since been lost to time. Entire lakes, biomes, and ancient stands of trees have been wiped off of the map, oftentimes as the direct result of extractive capitalism that has fueled the territorial and monetary expansion of the American civilization. But today we are going to be talking about one particular natural wonder, which at one time held a massive significance on the American landscape, but today has been almost completely forgotten. One that took millennia to form, created an ecosystem unlike anything else in the world, inspired cultures and traditions, and posed one of the largest technical challenges in America's westward expansion. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Milo Rossi, and today it is my great pleasure to tell you about America's lost natural wonder known as the Great Raft.
Schminky.
Don't look at me, I don't know what you're doing. Yeah, hit your head on the window. Okay. Yeah, knock over the Wi-Fi router. You know, I don't normally film these videos in the morning, but today you caught me at the coffee hour. Normally you catch me at the alcohol hour. Trying to get a bunch done in the early part of the day today because it's spring here in New England, which means that I have to spend most of the day prepping the farm beds. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about my promise from long ago to do a homesteading channel. I will still be doing that, don't worry, it's in the works. Still don't know what to call it. Open to suggestions, of course. Not doing Kaczynski Acres, I feel like that might get me into legal trouble. For some fucking reason. The year is 1806. The United States is a mere 30 years old and looks like this. She doesn't look a day over 25, if you ask me. It's okay, I can say it, I'm 25. Just 3 years ago, the United States made a big purchase. The Louisiana Purchase, to be specific. It was such a big purchase, in fact, that it doubled the size of the United States. The deal was sealed in April of 1803, when the United States purchased 830,000 square miles of land for a price of about $15 million. That's about 4 cents an acre, which is... I told you not to knock over the Wi-Fi router. Yeah, knock over the Wi-Fi router. Everyone take a good look at the creature that knocked over my Wi-Fi router. Do you have anything to say to yourself, for yourself? No thoughts behind those eyes. Yeah, okay, you're being ejected. That's about a price of 4 cents per acre, which is a screaming deal if you ask me. The seller of all of this land was France. You may have heard of them. They invented the rotary, the pencil sharpener, and one of the Guianas. You may also think to yourself, wow, that land wasn't really theirs to sell, was it? Considering the fact that it's absolutely nowhere near France whatsoever and literally already had a bunch of people already living on it. But like a junkie selling a stolen catalytic converter, France decided to sell it anyway. And like a kid on Christmas, the United States had to start playing with their stolen catalytic converter almost immediately. This analogy's not holding up anymore. You see, all of this land was a great opportunity for the young America. At the time, one of the driving mantras of the young country was manifest destiny, that America was destined to claim all of the land from sea to shining sea. One of the primary strategies that the American government utilized to further this agenda was settler colonialism, where they would encourage a ton of immigration into the country, and then they would tell all of those immigrants to go settle out west. By flooding the far reaches of the empire with American bodies, the US government could continue to expand the empire, and in doing so would likely knowingly force these new settlers into conflict with the indigenous people who, you know, lived there. Once conflict inevitably did arise between the settlers and the native nations, it was used to further the American propaganda that these barbarians just hate Americans for some reason. I just set up my house right here in the middle of their land and they just attacked me for like literally no reason. So for the low price of sacrificing some of their citizens, the American government could justify using their military force to continue a war of territorial expansion and replacement. Thank God nothing like that could ever happen again today. Now, because of this explicit goal, it was necessary for the young American nation to map new territorial acquisitions in order to better facilitate their settlement. Since the Louisiana Purchase was so large, it necessitated quite a few different expeditionary forces in order to actually map it. Probably the most famous of these being the Lewis and Clark expedition, as well as the two Pike expeditions aimed at mapping the Rocky Mountains and finding the headwaters of the Mississippi. I knew that Pike's Peak had to be named after a guy, but I didn't know until doing research for this video that his name was Zebulon. Zebulon. What the fuck is a Zebulon? Is that like one of those horses with the barcode? But our story begins with the much lesser known 1806 Freeman Custis expedition. I don't have much time. I'll explain this all in the next video, okay? I don't want to hear about it. But what I am here to tell you about, frickin' stickers. That's right, baby. We finally officially have some stickers after much requesting. Check these bad boys out, y'all. We got round 1 of the Mini Minuteman sticker pack, designed as always by my wonderful partner. We got a couple things going on here. We got a seal, we got 2 different badges, we got E Pluribus Gugum, and most importantly, we got the schmink. Oh my god, it autofocus on it. It thinks it's a cat. I mean, it's not wrong, it is a cat. Well, it's a sticker, but it's a sticker with a picture of a cat on it. Now, the possibilities with these stickers are literally endless. You can put them on your water bottle. Oh, I know, but it's gonna be funny. It's gonna be funny. Look, you can put them on your schmink. You don't like that, do you? Or you can put them on yourself. You're a star, Schminky. Well, actually, no, you're not a star. I'm sorry. You're actually a circle. What do you think? Not much, if anything, ever. Yeah, there we go. Schmink bottle. Anyway, stickers are live now. Go check them out. Link to that is in the description and on the little product doc thing. Supports me, supports the artist that made them, and gets to decorate your cool stuff. I normally come in to do a promotion at the end of a video, but this video has a pretty heavy ending and it would ruin the tone, so go impulse buy stickers now. And I'll explain more about this in the next video. You're in for a treat. If you liked Philip Zeba, ooh, you're gonna love this next one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the Freeman Custis expedition. While it's been largely forgotten in sort of the general cultural memory, the Freeman Custis expedition was one of the most important and expensive expeditions of the time. It was commissioned by Thomas Jefferson himself, who viewed it as being almost as important as the much more famous presidential expedition of Lewis and Clark. The expedition was headed by Thomas Freeman. He was a civil engineer and acted as the expedition's cartographer. As the name would suggest, he was of course joined by Peter Custis, who was a student of medicine and joined as the expedition's naturalist. These 2 men were joined by 22 others, including a captain, a lieutenant, soldiers, and an enslaved African man. The expedition was funded for $5,000, making it the most expensive expedition of its time. And while today it's widely known as the Freeman Custis expedition, at the time it was known as either the Red River expedition or the Great Excursion. As the name would suggest, this expedition set out to map the Red River. The team set out to locate its headwaters and find a navigable course for ships to use into the American interior. Now, there's a couple Red Rivers, confusingly, but today we're going to be talking about the Red River of the South. The Red River runs a total of 1,300 miles through the modern states of Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. At the end of its 1,300 miles, it reaches a confluence point with the Atchafalaya River, which then drains through the Atchafalaya Delta into the Gulf of Mexico. On April 19th of 1806, the Freeman Custis expedition set up the Red River in 2 flat-bottom boats. They left from Fort Adams, Mississippi, about 40 miles from the modern city of Natchez, and headed north. But it was not long into their ultimately ill-fated expedition that the explorers hit a snag. Log jams were common on the Red River. These big tangles of driftwood and logs and stumps became known as snags, and the Freeman Custis expedition became pretty accustomed to having to navigate around these obstructions, either lifting the boats up over blockages or navigating through smaller tributary bayous in order to get around them. While most blockages could be navigated with relative ease, in mid-June, the party, which had now been reinforced with 20 additional men, hit a snag of monumental proportions. At first, it just appeared like a logjam, not dissimilar to the things that they had navigated around in order to get this far. But as they disembarked their boats to investigate further, they found that it was something much, much bigger. This tangle of old-growth cedar and cypress trunks was so big that it formed a completely impenetrable mass. Clearing it, like they had with some of the smaller log jams, was completely out of the question. According to expedition logs, when the team climbed on top of this structure, they found it to be, quote, so tightly bound that a man could walk over it in any direction. Since there was no way through this enormous tangle of debris, and the team had no idea how far it stretched, they had no choice but to circumnavigate it by going into the smaller bayous around the river. In most places, this enormous blockage spanned the entirety of the Red River, and the only way that you could see where the actual river bottom was by identifying where the trees were growing out of the blockage from the riverbank below. All told, the expedition, which consisted of now more than 40 men, spent 3 grueling weeks trudging through the hot, humid bayous of western Louisiana to circumnavigate this enormous obstacle. By the time they had finally reached the end and discovered the Red River flowing free again, they had traveled more than 160 miles. This would become the first recorded European documentation of the natural wonder that would become known as the Great Raft. The Great Raft was a name given to a massive tangle of debris that clogged the Red River in modern-day Louisiana for more than 160 miles. It's believed that the Great Raft began its formation about 1,200 years ago, and it was, as far as we know, the largest feature of its kind in all of North America. While a giant logjam may not sound very glamorous, its existence had a massive ripple effect for the ecosystems and cultures that developed around it. The southernmost point of the Great Raft was somewhere around the town of Natchitoches, Louisiana. Natchitoches? Natchitoches. Natchitoches.
Natchitoches.
Shoddy make my...
Natchitoches.
From there, it stretched 160 miles north, ending somewhere near the town of Fulton, Arkansas, which is a smaller town near Texarkana. The Great Raft was composed of all kinds of debris, but primarily the trunks of red cedar, cypress, cottonwood, and even petrified wood. Because of how old it was all matted together with shrubs and sticks and grasses that began to create almost a meadow ecosystem on top of the structure. While the Freeman Custis expedition noted that they could walk across it easily in any direction, it was later found, and is in my opinion, much more impressive, that people could easily ride horses across the top of it. People climbing across loose debris is one thing, I can kind of believe that, but if it's tightly bound enough that you can ride a horse across it, it may as well just be the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, can we get a shout out for the ground? Can we smash that like button for the ground? I'd like to give a big thank you to John F. Ground, inventor of the ground. John F. Ground bravely thought to himself, what if a wall was down here? It was estimated that the raft could be upwards of 25 feet deep in places, filling the entire riverbed all the way to the very bottom. Now, when you look at this thing, you may be thinking to yourself, how the fuck? And that's exactly what I was wondering. And there's actually 2 running theories for how the fuck. The first theory for the formation of this feature is probably the one that all of us would immediately go to, which is just this sort of runaway snowball effect of things falling into the river and then building on each other. You see, the Red River goes through a lot of red clay, which is where the Red River gets its name. This part of the world is very sedimenty and silty, so rivers are always meandering around, and so as the Red River would do this, it could, erode a huge chunk of riverbank. It pulls in like pretty much a quarter acre of forest, and then all of that washes down and gets stuck somewhere. Compound that year after year after year, and you have all this stuff starting to pile up, and eventually you've created a raft that no matter how big the flood is, it doesn't actually move it. It's just created an impenetrable mass that the river can't even get around anymore. But the other theory for how this structure formed has to do with this spot, where the Red River, the Atchafalaya River, and the Mississippi River all meet. Currently, the Mississippi River drains through the Mississippi River Delta in New Orleans, Louisiana. But it hasn't always. Like we said earlier, these rivers meander around all of the time. And at one point, the Red River and Atchafalaya River were connected in some way. So the theory is that about 1,200 years ago, there was a massive flood in the Mississippi River, as there is almost every single year, and it pushed debris upstream on the Red River. Like, there was just so much water that it just pushed it backwards and, like, lodged all of this debris that had come down the Mississippi and just pushed it upstream and made an impenetrable mass. And then from there, for the next 1,200 years, stuff just kept washing down the river and getting stuck behind it. Now, interestingly, at the point where all 3 of these rivers meet is Fort Adams, which is where the Freeman Custis expedition left on their expedition. Today, it's also home to the low sill control structure. You see, at this point, the Mississippi River should have meandered to be draining out of the Atchafalaya Basin right now. But that wouldn't be very good for the American economy, so they set up a dam structure to keep the Mississippi River flowing out of the Mississippi River Delta. So that dam is the only thing stopping the Mississippi River from naturally draining about 70 miles away from New Orleans and completely destroying the US economy. So we want to be really careful about that, guys. We want to be careful. So anyway, as you can imagine, a structure like the Great Raft existing in one place for well over 1,000 years has some massive repercussions for pretty much everything around it. Most notably of these being the ecology. Imagine a beaver dam. Yeah, good. Okay, now come back to me. By slowing the flow of a river, a beaver dam allows for water to reach much further and, more importantly, soak into the ground. When a river is running, that's great and everything, but when water is made to slow down and soak into the soil is where the real magic happens. This is why many rivers altered by man, like the LA River, have completely lost all of their ability to be an actual river, because they paved it. So the water just goes so fast. They're like, why is there a drought here? It's like, well, why do you fucking think there's a drought here? Also, you put like 800 million people in the fucking desert, okay? I don't know what you want me to tell you. Because of this, beavers create immensely productive ecosystems that can last long after the beavers have abandoned the structure. This is why these animals are known ecologically as a keystone species. This one species essentially builds an ecosystem, and the reintroduction of beavers into places that they were hunted to extinction often comes with massive positive benefits for the local ecology and all of the human industries that rely on it, from tourism to hunting and fishing. Now, I want you to apply this principle to the Great Raft. It was essentially a 160-mile-long beaver dam that lasted for over 1,000 years. That's pretty big. It's impossible to understate not only how crucial this structure was for the local ecology, but also how much it altered the environment. You see, the huge amount of water that still needed to travel out to the sea was forced to take new paths, and so it overflowed the banks of the now clogged Red River into the surrounding landscape. This, of course, not only slowed down the water, allowing it to soak into the soil, but actually created more rivers and lakes that expanded far beyond the banks of the Red River. As this water escaped the banks, it created a meandering network of tributaries and bayous that flowed through the surrounding landscape, spreading the benefits of this slow-moving fertile water far beyond the banks of the Red River. But the most interesting part of this, in my opinion, is that as these tributaries meandered into low-lying areas, they created massive lakes. While it's unknown just how many lakes were created by the Great Raft, some of the most notable were, time for me to read off my laptop because I can't memorize all these things, Caddo Lake, Cross Lake, Lake Bestenso, Wallace Lake, Black Bayou Lake, Fairy Lake, Clear Lake, and Soda Lake. This collection of lakes, when combined together, were known as the Raft Lakes. Some of these, like the enormous Soda Lake, were seasonal. During rainy seasons, they would fill to a high water line, and in more dry seasons, they would return to a productive wetland. Other lakes, like Caddo Lake, were permanent and hosted enormous old-growth cedar and cypress swamps. These lakes, beyond the fish, reptiles, and amphibians that called them home, also hosted massive flocks of migratory birds. And of course, the forests around this massive 160-mile logjam benefited as well. Forest diversity would have skyrocketed as more water became available. Trees like oak, sycamore, willow, and even persimmon became far more abundant, as well as the species that relied on them. Even the raft itself began to turn into its own unique ecosystem, and it's likely that the entire structure, from the saturated lower levels to the nooks and crannies in the middle to the grassland on the top, created a unique microbiome that may very well have been the largest of its kind in the entire world. I think I'm beginning to emphasize to you just how important this structure was, but just to spell it out, the Great Raft wasn't just a logjam. It was, in its truest sense, a crucial physical part of the environment. It defined the landscapes and created the ecosystems around it for more than 1,000 years. And the significance of this structure was, of course, not lost on the people that called this area home. Unsurprisingly, the Great Raft did not go unnoticed by the indigenous North American groups who called this area home since long before the structure even existed. One of the primary groups to live in this area during the time of the Great Raft were the Caddo People. Their ancestral lands follow the course of the Red River from southern Louisiana into Arkansas, and a combination of oral history and archaeological evidence suggests that this group have occupied the area since about 800 or 900 CE, which, very interestingly, is around the same time that evidence suggests the Great Raft began to form. This could suggest that the raft's formation had such a massive effect on the environment that it could have caused a shift in lifestyle for the cultures living in the area that directly led to the formation of the Caddo people. This group lived in small towns along the tributaries and waterways around the Red River. Like many other native groups in this part of the world, the Caddo people built mounds, like this one at the Belcher site in Louisiana, or this one at the Caddoan Mound site in Alto, Texas. If you're interested in mound building cultures and civilizations, you should check out my recent videos on the Great Circle Earthworks. It's a mound that's great and it's a circle, and my video on the sacred geometry and astronomical alignments of the octagon earthworks, which is also an earthwork in the shape of an octagon, wouldn't you know? And as a little spoiler here, these videos took a very long time in production, and so I try to have like one really big project in the back burner at all times while my team and I work on slightly easier videos. And now that these two projects are done, the one that we're working on is Poverty Point, baby. So get ready for that. It'll still be a little while, but my team and I are working on a full video on site at Poverty Point now, so get excited for that. It'll blow your mind. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video about this giant pile of dirt.
These mounds are piles of dirt in the same way that the Parthenon is a pile of rocks.
Damn, sorry, Brad. Jeez, man, I was just trying to be funny. The Great Raft was central to the Caddoan way of life. Firstly, it provided the foundation of their diet. The far-reaching benefits of the Great Raft created pretty much a gigantic food forest. The lakes and bayous were teeming with life, from fish, reptiles, and crawdads to water birds like ducks and geese. The forest was also teeming with animals who benefited from the Great Raft's biodiversity. Deer, rabbit, squirrel, turkey, as well as countless other animals would have called this forest home. And even the forest composition itself would have been a veritable Garden of Eden, with an immense variety of wild plants, fruits, berries, and nuts. All told, you can see why the Caddo people only partially relied on agriculture, as the environment they lived in was so productive on its own that it didn't really necessitate them relying on agriculture. However, when it did come to agriculture, the Caddo people were very good at that as well. The intermittent flooding that would have taken place in this area created really fertile agricultural ground. This group would have grown staple indigenous American crops like the Three Sisters, corns, bean, and squash. Cornses, as well as other parts of the eastern agricultural complex like sunflower and tobacco. And the creeks and movements of the Great Raft also functioned as a calendar, indicating to the Caddo people when it was time to plant different crops. Now, much like the Great Raft acted like a barrier with water, slowing it down and allowing it to soak into the ground, it also functioned in a very similar way with people. Since the Red River was blocked, other tribes and groups navigating through this area would have to cross over this formidable obstacle. This would have slowed people down and make them stay longer, which put the Caddo people right in the middle of a highly profitable trade corridor between the fertile plains of the Mississippi and the grasslands of the Southwest. This allowed them to mediate and participate in trade with two vastly different regions of their world. All told, the amount of goods flowing to and from their land, as well as the fertile earth they occupied, made them a highly successful people. And the same phenomenon that helped slow down people in water also helped keep this culture safe. The existence of the Great Raft and the complicated network of bayous and lakes around it helped protect them from foreign invasion, whether it be invasion from their neighbors or the later invasion of Europeans. Because of how much of the Caddoan way of life was centered around this structure, it was of course incorporated into their folklore as well. According to their oral histories, the Great Spirit created a flood that built the logjam, potentially leading some credibility to the theory that it was backwash from the Mississippi that started the beginning of this raft. What's pretty amazing is that this is a lasting oral memory of the creation of the Great Raft, handed down generation by generation for 1,200 years. And because of its significance, the Caddo people viewed the Great Raft as a being in and of itself. It was constantly shifting and moving and changing, and their coexistence with this structure could be directly linked to their success in this part of the world. This structure created the foundation of their diet and their trade network. It kept their culture safe and prosperous for 1,200 years, and potentially the formation of the Great Raft led to the formation of their people, almost born parallel alongside one another. Because of this, it's not hard to see why the Caddo people viewed this structure as a sacred entity, something like a god on Earth. With all this, we have a solid overview of the world created by the Great Raft, a one-of-a-kind feature that took specific circumstances and over 1,000 years in order to fully form. It created an immensely productive system, both ecologically and culturally, that changed the landscape for hundreds of square miles and for which no direct parallel exists today. It is impossible to understate how important and spectacular this feature would have been. And now is the really upsetting part of this video. I'm sure you've noticed I've been using a lot of past tense. After all, this video is probably called something like America's Lost Natural Wonder. And that is because nearly everything we just talked about has been wiped from the face of the earth. Had to add a jacket. Got cold. It's a totally different day now, which is why it got cold. From the first official mapping and documentation of the Great Raft in 1806, the United States government viewed it as nothing more than an obstacle. You see, one of America's greatest strengths is the fact that it has a bunch of navigable rivers that go deep into its interior, which especially in the early days of the country acted like highways, connecting the coast with the breadbasket of America. The clearing of the Great Raft would not only make the Red River navigable for ships and paddle steamers, but also open up the fertile lands along the banks of the river, which could be developed into both small-scale farms and the much more lucrative slave plantations. The shipping lanes would not only be able to export product from these plantations, but also be able to import men and materials much farther upriver. One of these strategic locations was Fort Towson in Oklahoma, which was, as its name suggests, a fort. Since this was a vital stepping stone for the United States government to continue their invasion into native land, it was necessary to open the river to allow for men, materials, and munitions to be able to reach this fort. Now, while the removal of the Great Raft was deemed a necessity, this was a much easier feat on paper than it was in practice. The sheer scale of this structure pushed the engineers of the time to the absolute limit. In 1828, just about 20 years after the raft's initial discovery, Congress approved a staggering $25,000 to facilitate its removal. And by 1832, they found just the guy for the operation, none other than Captain Henry Shreve. This may be a name that you're actually familiar with. The guy was a pretty brilliant inventor. He improved and refined the designs of ships in order to make them specifically suited for the challenges that these waterways posed to them. And his ingenuity was able to challenge massive paddle steamer monopolies like Robert Fulton's on the Mississippi. And it is after Captain Shreve that the Louisiana city of Shreveport gains its name. Shreve had plenty of experience removing log jams before. This was not the first one he'd seen, but it was the biggest one he'd seen. And so this specific obstacle required a specific tool in order to clear it. In 1829, just a few years before he'd be chosen to clear the Great Raft, he debuted this. It was called the Heliopolis. It was the first true snag boat, a boat whose specific purpose was for removing snags. Now, log jams were not only a navigational impediment to boats, but they also posed a very sneaky hidden obstacle as well. These muddy, silty rivers could easily obscure massive logs that were lodged in the sediment below. And with steamship captains completely unable to see them, they could act like battering rams, punching directly through a wooden steamship's hull. The most famous example is probably the steamship Arabia, a steamship that hit a hidden snag on the Missouri River in 1856. What's interesting about this ship is after it rapidly sank, the Missouri River meandered away, and the Arabia was rediscovered in the 1980s in the middle of a farmer's field. It actually has a whole museum dedicated to it now. Because the ship sunk and was buried in mud so rapidly, it almost created a bit of a time capsule. It's a really cool sight. I've thought about making a video on this, but I'd want to actually go to the museum for it, so I don't know. If that's something y'all are interested in, I could tolerate going to... Where the fuck is it? Is it in Missouri? Is it in Kansas City? I was just in Kansas City. Don't tell me it's in Kansas City. Dude, I'm so pissed. I literally could have gone there. I was just in fucking Kansas. Ah! So anyway, I digress, as I do so often in these videos. But the Heliopolis had to not only be able to remove snags, but also protect itself from being impaled. The ship had two massive reinforced hulls, and between them, an enormous iron battering ram that would be used to smash into obstacles. On the deck, it had a windlass crane, which was connected to the power from the ship's engines. It was a pretty revolutionary technology at the time that gave the crane immense pulling power. The ship was even equipped with an onboard sawmill. Captain Shreve and his crew of 150 men aboard the Heliopolis began dismantling the Great Raft in April of 1833, and they used the ship's arsenal of tools to go to war against this structure. The team made slow, agonizing progress, battling up the river mile by mile. But compared to how long it had existed, Captain Shreve's cranes, rams, and sawmills made short work of this ancient structure. And by 1836, Shreve's team had destroyed 70 miles of the Great Raft. It was at this point that he requested more funding from Congress. You see, the debris they were pulling out, they'd chop and burn and then just kind of throw back in the river. And while some of it would just float out to sea, others of it would get tangled together and almost start to reform the raft farther down. Congress did what Congress does best. They took a guy who knew exactly what he was talking about and making a very logical request and ignored him. And sure enough, by 1839, a large portion of the Great Raft had reformed on the southern part of the Red River. Who would have fucking thought? Then, then Congress did what Congress does second best, and that is spending like fucking 8 times the money that they could have spent if they just listened to the guy in the first place. For the next 30 years, Congress would spend $600,000 fighting the Great Raft, and it wouldn't be until the 1870s, almost 20 years after Shreve's death, that the structure was finally erased. The final push, headed by Lieutenant A.E. Woodruff, used snag boats, cranes, and nitroglycerin to finally destroy the last remnant of this ancient monument. And as the dust settled and the smoke dissipated, the Red River flowed freely for the first time in 1,200 years. It is impossible to quantify the consequences of the removal of the Great Raft. To the young United States, the consequences were negligible. Save for some taxpayer money and the loss of some minor bayous, the pros far outweighed the cons. But to the cultures and ecosystems that had developed around the Great Raft, its removal was nothing short of apocalyptic. With the raft's removal, the Red River adopted a single course, and almost immediately the lakes and bayous on its periphery began to dry up. Among these, Black Lake, Lat Lake, and Saline Lake disappeared almost entirely, and with them the enormous diversity of fish, migratory birds, and wild game that had sustained not only the indigenous people, but early American pioneers. As these once productive lakes vanished, they left behind cracked, dry mudflats. Along with the lakes, many of the bayous also began to run dry. Among these was Big Cypress Bayou, which ironically was so wide and deep that it was easily navigable by paddle steamers before the removal of the Great Raft, something that did not go unnoticed to the first Europeans to settle in this area, as this bayou had a paddle steamer town built along it, the town of Jefferson, Texas. But after the removal of the Great Raft, Big Cypress Bayou receded more than 15 miles into the now much smaller Caddo Lake, and this completely gutted the town of Jefferson, Texas, as it essentially cut off its main artery to the American trade network. In essence, the American government was willing to sacrifice this small town and its inhabitants in favor of the much more wealthy and aristocratic planter class. This bayou, as well as many others, once flowed through the largest cypress swamp in the entire world. Pre-industrialization, ancient cypress swamps covered millions of square acres of the American South. These ancient, slow-growing trees can live for more than 2,000 years. In fact, this area was so naturally abundant that ancient cultures were able to erect enormous monuments without the invention of agriculture. But today, nearly every single acre of this natural wonder has been logged and drained. Almost every single one of America's ancient old-growth cypress trees has been turned into lumber, or much worse due to its rot-resistant qualities, mulch. Today, cypress swamps cover less than 1% of their historic range, and nearly every acre of it is second growth, feeble and stunted due to the mismanagement of our water resources. While some old growth does still exist today, it is truly a rarity, the last of its kind in the entire world. Some of the raft lakes managed to survive the destruction of the Great Raft, such as Caddo Lake, Cross Lake, Lake Bestenso, and Wallace Lake. All of these lakes shrank significantly, and only exist at all today due to the construction of man-made dams. Second growth cypress has been able to reestablish a foothold on the shorelines of these lakes, but the ancient shorelines that developed for over 1,000 years have long since been left behind as the water receded. I camped along the shore of Caddo Lake this winter, actually, which is the only reason I even know about this structure at all. And as I went down the Wikipedia rabbit hole learning about the madness of this story, I learned that Caddo Lake even had one more insult to injury. As if all of this wasn't enough, Caddo Lake was one of the first areas to ever test an overwater oil rig. In fact, just off the shores of Caddo Lake today is the aptly named Oil City. In my opinion, a poetic example of our culture's insatiable need to squeeze an area until there is nothing left. While to the Americans, the removal of the Great Raft was a triumph, to the Caddo people, it was essentially a death sentence. As we spoke about earlier, the Caddo people had developed their culture for over 1,000 years to work alongside this massive monument. It had also kept them safe from the European invasion up until this point. And now, both of those things were gone. Due to their unique geographic position, they had seen what had happened to all of their neighbors around them. The vicious conquest of the Spaniards in the west, as well as that of the French, English, and now American in the north and east. While their unique environment had kept them safe for many years, they knew that it wasn't long before this invasion came right to their doorstep. In 1835, with much of the Great Raft destroyed, the way of life of the Caddo people began to collapse. Every system of survival they had developed for over the last 1,000 years was destroyed with snag boats and nitroglycerin. And the United States, just like every other colonizing force in history and today, knew this. They knew that one of the best ways to control a people is to cut off their supply of food. While yes, their primary goal of the destruction of the Great Raft was to open up the Red River, it was not lost on them that this was a spectacular opportunity to continue the ethnic cleansing that they had waged from the Atlantic coast. After all, in the eyes of the American Empire, the Caddo people were nothing more than the Great Raft, an obstacle that simply needed to be cleared. Sure enough, in 1835, the United States government came knocking on the door of the Caddo people. By this point, they could see that their starvation campaign was having the desired effect, and they knew that the Caddo people would be near the point of desperation. And so, as they so often did, the United States government offered them a deal. The deal was very simple. Sell your lands and move out peacefully. Tashar, the head chief of the Caddo people, spoke about this treaty and said, "My children, for what do you mourn? Are you not starving in the midst of this land? And do you not travel far from it in quest for food? The game we live on is going farther off, and the white man is coming nearer to us, and is not our condition getting worse daily? Then why lament for the loss of that which yields us nothing but misery? Let us be wise then, and get all we can for it, and not wait till the white man steals it away, little by little, and then gives us nothing." The Caddo people were painfully aware that this treaty wasn't a generous offer by a benevolent neighbor. It was merely a formality. If the Caddo people refused, the United States government would just take what they want by force. In an attempt to save their people, they were left no choice but to sign a treaty of cession, yielding almost 1 million acres that their ancestors had inhabited for over 1,000 years to the hands of the US government. During the negotiations, the Caddo people lacked their primary translator and were forbidden from having their French Creole translators present. It's impossible to say how much this handicap affected the results of this treaty. When ink was put to paper, the Caddo people were given horses and provisions of an estimated value of $30,000, as well as the promise of $10,000 additional dollars for the next 5 years. This promise, like many made by the US government even to this day, was broken, and much of the money promised has still never been delivered. Much of the tribe fled to Mexican Texas, but after it declared independence in 1836, they faced violent reprisals from the Texans. The group then tried to make their way back towards their homeland, but the United States wouldn't allow them in. After all, the United States government had already extracted what it was that they wanted from these people. And so the men, women, and children of the Caddo people became refugees in their own homeland. Eventually, they were forced into Indian territory that would one day go on to become the US state of Oklahoma, which is where many of the descendants of this group and members of its current community live to this day. Their tribal headquarters is in the town of Binger, Oklahoma, and the tribe gained federal recognition in the 1970s. Today, many members of this group have been able to keep their cultures and traditions alive against the odds. Many of the rites and rituals that the Caddo people developed over 1,000 years in the hot, humid bayous of Louisiana are practiced today on the dusty plains of Oklahoma. Today, the murky waters of the Red River still flow freely. It works its way through farm fields and small towns, and eventually through the major city of Shreveport, Louisiana, which boasts a population of almost 190,000. Once you get past the agricultural land on the sides of the Red River, you'll find a few small, shrunken lakes, almost always with a large man-made earthen dam facing towards the river. These lakes have vacation cabins, campgrounds, and fishing and boating opportunities. But the Great Raft, which created these lakes and much of the land around it, has been almost forgotten. There is nobody alive for several generations who has an actual memory of this structure's existence. And while for those who live along the banks of the Red River today, there may be a lasting cultural memory, in the overarching American consciousness, the Great Raft may as well have never existed. But of course, the conquest of the American Empire didn't stop with the destruction of this raft. After the Red River was clear, it was used as a staging ground to conquer new lands, and eventually complete their manifest destiny from sea to shining sea. And as those aspirations grew bigger and those conquests farther reaching, it left the Red River behind. While it is still a massive river that supplies a livelihood for many people, today, it's a relatively insignificant minor waterway. It's not a colossal hub of trade, the backbone of our national economy. And while of course industry, commerce, and trade all still take place along its banks, it leaves us with the question, was it worth it? And this is an open-ended question, to which we may each have our own answer. If I were a resident of Shreveport, Louisiana, I might be motivated to say absolutely. After all, the post-raft world is the only world I've ever known. Then again, if I were a different resident of Shreveport, I may wonder to myself what my world would be like if the raft did still exist. I mean, the ecosystem around this structure provided for groups of people for over 1,000 years before their arrival. So is it unfair to say that it could have done the same for us? As for the descendants of the Caddo people who once called this place home, I can't speak on their behalf. But as someone who currently lives in the United States and whose ancestors didn't arrive here until long after the destruction of the Great Raft, I, like all of us, have to reckon with the fact that this country, as well as all of those in the New World, are built on the single largest genocide in human history. Whenever I bring up this topic, I am frequently met by people in the comments who are really hurt by it. They'll scream woke or white guilt to prevent them from having to have an uncomfortable conversation. But history is uncomfortable. It's impossible to tell the story of the Great Raft and leave out the greater implications. It would not be enough for me to merely call this a giant logjam that was cleared to make way for the city of Shreveport. While believe me, I fully understand the discomfort that comes with trying to reckon with our place in the post-colonial world, the worst thing we can do is self-censor and try and pretend it never happened. And the brutal irony is that the removal of the Great Raft set off a domino effect that would make even American citizens reliant on the systems of power. Like I said earlier, if you want to control a population, the thing you gotta go for is the food. Huge swaths of North America would have had absolutely no problem sustaining people with the resources that were naturally there. But the extractive industries that have kept the ruling class fat and happy has ruined that for all of us. A system has been created where we have no choice but to be dependent on them. And this is where I find a beautiful irony in those that have a hard time hearing me talk about these harsh truths. They'll say it's a thing of the past, or, well, that group lost out, but we gained everything. And while there's no comparison to be made against total losses, it always makes me wonder if they see that they've lost as well. The post-industrial world is not a good one. We've not been given some new sense of sovereignty through our technological advancements. When my family came to America from Italy in the early 1900s, they may have thought they were coming here for some American dream. But you know what they did when they got here? They mined coal. My great-grandfather, like many others in Appalachia, died of black lung in his 50s. It's important to tell these stories because they're stories that are still unfolding today, both right here on our own soil and overseas. And I say these things not out of political conviction, because it is my hope that we will all come to see the one great universal truth, and that is that there is no such thing as left and right. There is only up and down. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all very much for watching this video. I know we got a little heavy here at the end, but again, that's very intentional. You can't tell stories like this and sugarcoat it. It's a lot deeper than just big logjam existed. If you enjoyed this video but aren't done doing your dishes or folding your laundry, I have plenty others like it. Feel free to check them out. And if you learned a thing or two in this video or appreciated what I had to say, I'd love if you could leave an interaction on the video. Likes, comments, and subscriptions help make the video do better in the algorithm, so things like this can compete with all of the bullshit. It's your way of helping promote free educational content, and it doesn't cost you a cent. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to my editorial team, who help make all of these videos possible. I may be the person who's in front of the camera, but there are so many people who spend so much longer staring at my mug to make all of this happen. I literally could not do it without you guys. I love you, and thank you for your help. And lastly, I'd like to give a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Patrons get early ad-free access to all of my videos, and all of your names will be in the credits of this video as a small token of my appreciation. If you'd like to become a patron, link to that is in the description of this video. Ladies and gentlemen, remember to stay curious, stay inquisitive, and most importantly, remember, the most affluent of countries operates on a depletion economy which leaves destruction in its wake. Your people are driven by a terrible sense of deficiency. When the last tree is cut, the last fish is caught, and the last river is polluted, when to breathe the air is sickening, you will realize too late that wealth is not in bank accounts and that you can't eat money.
I feel very lucky to be alive on this planet.